Then Germany, they are not under the Five Eyes organizations, so they come in order. They will continue also with Huawei. Yeah, so basically these are the two big ones. And then countries like Italy and so on, and France. France, I think, also follow Germany. So Germany actually, they will go in also. And Italy already started already. China, the Huawei is actually setting up things like that. So probably Spain and all these countries will follow soon. So the whole Europe, I think, will be all Huawei. Yeah. Because Theresa May actually too busy with Brexit and then
shake hand with Trump.
very troublesome.
They shake hand before earlier. Somebody said.
The good thing will come when they start putting up a tariff on British import. Okay, let me see. Number 5.
You say the Americans are sleeping, maybe they are not sleeping. It's the capitalists are making a lot of money by manufacturing in China and selling in America and making a lot of money. So the capitalists want to shake the boat. So people want to shake the boat, then they continue manufacturing in China.
You are right in a sense, yeah. Being working in the MNC before, yes, the bottom line is always important. Yeah, and if you run a listed company, same thing also. The bottom line is important. The shareholder looking for the dividends. Yeah. But of course, if you run a listed company, you can actually do a lot of arrangement to keep the shareholder happy. And also to keep the director themselves, the pocket is full also.
If they can install cheap,
so that is exactly the situation. Now, what actually happened, in the early 80s or even in the late 70s, they actually, the Western country have already started the management by using outsourcing.
Globalization.
Anybody heard about outsourcing?
Not outsourcing, it's called globalization really.
Yeah.
Outsourcing is...
So outsourcing is actually,
in
we keep ourselves slim. We don't want to have heavy asset because of the changing world. Today I invest $100 million on this equipment, tomorrow, 5 years later, obsolete. Especially in the medical industry. Expensive X-ray, yeah. Expensive MRI, expensive CT scan. And CT scan, every 6 months they already update the software. Every 1 year, the whole thing is changed. You can see that or not. Even the scope to actually look into your stomach or look into your intestine. Every now and then they actually have to take. I have a friend that was actually working in SGH for many years, and they came out and then the first thing at that time, he got to invest all this equipment. And when you invest on all this equipment, obsolescence is one very painful kind of investment. Second thing is, all this equipment got to sterilize and then keep it clean ready to use kind of thing. How are you going to actually get all these technicians to do it? And who is actually going to check on the technician doing the good job? So after 2 years outside private practice, eventually he was actually anyway renting a unit in Radical. And then at that time, all this kind of thing was actually, all the specialists for every equipment they have to actually invest themselves. Subsequently, with all these so-called specialists, all faced with different kind of things, it's impossible for them to run this way. They spend more time on keeping their equipment than looking after the patient. So eventually, of course, Radical and all these big company, of course, the management staff are very clever and immediately, okay, if you need my operation theatre, we go by hour, go by minute charge. If you need to have all this whatever scan, we provide the service for you. Depending on how big is the scan, how many minutes to actually finish the MRI and so on, they go by minutes too. So if you want to scan the whole spine, from the head all to the bottom, probably take 4 hours. So they normally don't do that, only a suction. You cannot stay there for 4 hours, without turning, because once it's turning, the whole thing gone. And they cannot tie you down also. So they all go by section. So the first thing go for X-ray, identify which section, then this portion, MRI, if they want to go for operation. If they don't go for operation, they just look at the X-ray and then close the case. So that is actually the situation. So outsourcing was a fashion. So what actually happened? At that time, China actually was admitted into the World Trade Organization. And there was a scheme so-called the General Preference of Tariff. It is a German phrase actually. That means for those developing countries, they are qualified to be exempted from import duty. I believe all of you know it, I think, those doing the trading and so on. And Singapore, I think in 69 or even earlier, or 65, a few years after the industrial, I think 79 is about it. Singapore, because of the GDP, was actually higher, because a lot of expatriates are staying in Singapore, and then somehow they actually generate the GDP become higher because higher pay and so on, So Singapore was actually excluded, So at that time, a lot of Singapore's people, CYC and all these companies making garment and so on. So they want to export to Europe, to US, high tax, no more exemption. So what do? They get the Vietnamese factory, do all the thing. How do they do it? Okay. They do all the cutting, everything and so on. And the final sewing in so-called in Vietnam. And then they put the label, made in Vietnam. Then they qualify to go in. So subsequently, the law enforcement agency will actually look into what is the added value in Singapore and added value in Vietnam before they qualify. So a lot of this kind of so coming to talk about trade kind of regulation and so on, it is a very complicated kind of situation nowadays. Especially if you look into a lot of things now, everything actually service out already, and then you can actually say the computer you strip it off and then say no. In fact, all the parts all come from all over the world. It can be something that from US, go into China, and then come out, go to Germany or come to Singapore, and then go back to China again. Then finally, the computer go back to the US. So if you go so many rounds, the final product is going to tax how many times, Can you imagine? So that is exactly the problem. So now all the, I don't think Trump can actually overcome this kind of problem now. Definitely, they don't have a factory, they don't have the trained worker to actually to start production. It's not something that you just bring the line over there and then the worker put out there, they already know. Yeah. Right. And then how about all those parts and so on? If you say that China now cannot buy the chips from popcorn, Broadcom, or ARMS, ARM. Yeah, because of all these so-called bank and so on. So, if they cannot buy, where is actually all the final chips that actually you need it for your server? If you want to move your server out of China, because the server is going to go to US, it will be import duty. Right? So, how are you going to actually do all this? I think it's best that Trump don't go for second term.
Must lah.
If he go for second term, no, he himself is also bigger headed,
No, you get elected, then the whole world will change, right?
The whole world will change. The whole world will go into war.
No, I tell you war lah, then you will change.
Where you find here? What address? Address really.
How you going to face with all your country people, The farmer are all broke now because of soya bean. Yeah? China start growing soya bean. Soya bean only take about few months. You get soya bean. It's not like durian tree. You have to wait for 5 years. So soya bean they start planting already in Mongolian area, the inner Mongolian. It started out.
You don't have the gene pool. You don't have genes. The breed you cannot plant.
Okay. No, it's important to actually look into all this. Otherwise, if you look into it and then you don't actually appreciate some of the thing. Okay, number 5. Okay, now start coming to the point. It's a question of trust. There are a few factors actually coming in because I think it's impossible to actually pick one video and then it will explain everything. That is the reason I try to link up the gap between video. What actually happened, there are many factors actually leading to present so-called thing. And basically, it is now, because of the ignorance of the thing, now there is no more trust between US and the rest of the world, not only China. And the mistrust between US and Huawei is, in fact, is being sort of politicized already. It's no longer just economics or it's country kind of trade friction. It's more into Trump's second term and so on. So what actually happened, Now why 4G? There was no such a hoo-ha. When China actually started, of course, China did not really take part of the 4G network specification and so on. They will just happen that everybody need the equipment, hardware and so on. They will go to China, go to Shenzhen, sign the contract, I get the thing, and it will be perfect. The engineer will come over and set up and so on. Now why 4G? This problem doesn't come up. The reason is very simple. 4G network is very slow. You are not going to actually link up with the autonomous car and all the coming Internet of Things because the speed is not there. But when you come to automations in big scale and so on, like 5G, which is actually faster than even fiber optics. you know, if you really run all the way up to the highest frequency and so on. So indeed, it will become a security threat. Your whole airport, there were a lot of automations from your immigration's face scanning and then you know, kind of things, and to your this control towers, communications, and then all the things are all run automatically, directing of your aircraft and so on. You can imagine somebody can actually get in and then do a disruption, close down the signal. I think they will be disastrous. And that is why Singapore is very, very careful on this. I do not know whether anybody actually heard the news about Mahathir was making.
Yeah, he supported China.
He supported the thing. He said that we have nothing to hide. All our thing are all you can come and
You can conquer, just walk through only, no need to.
Yeah. He said if you want to come and conquer us, you just walk through, we don't defend.
The Japanese did that.
Wow, the first time I appreciate his statement. But it's true.
Then Trump put him under currency manipulator.
He has nothing to lose.
Trump says he's a currency
Because he doesn't have any F-15. For us, you say something like that, your F-15 will be all grounded. Okay, let's look at this one. I think it's it is actually, now what I mentioned, is 5G is different. It really changed the way of communication. It changed the way of actually in the IoT. The IoT, when it comes in, you need 5G, because otherwise how are you going to connect? And you cannot say I have all the mobile devices, I'm going to actually plug into my landline. It's all impossible. Yeah. And in fact, same thing also, even those countries like France and so on, their farm cannot use those drones to actually do their farming. That is why they are also waiting for the 5G.
Cannot. Drone just fly where you cannot.
No, yeah, you know the latency is very important, right? Although overshot, then you go and spray on your neighborhoods, your neighbors are farmers. Or put the wrong fertilizer on the wrong part of the farm. They have to actually all this. Yeah, so whether you like it or not, the 5G have to be there, and the 5G is not cheap and so on.
Is
Okay.
China using 5G already?
Come again?
Is China using 5G already?
They started already.
They started already.
They started already.
Which other country is using 5G besides China?
The first one is actually, is it Korea?
No I thought somewhere in the airport one right, China 5G where? I think airport I heard.
I think
where?
China, last time the three company is trial 5G test. Basically, just released the license for all the three companies. So
all the three companies already. In China, there are three.
will have the license. So they now it's actually full phase now.
They are rolling out.
But they still go on the city base. Yeah.
Yeah.
I checked, I can't find the 5G hotspot. There are those 4G one.
You go to one knob. Go to
No,
one
I
knob.
mean you 4G, you put a SIM card in, then it's hotspot already. Then if I have a 5G, like those type of 5G.
They have a meter.
5G router, something like that. Then I put a 5G SIM card. Then my old phone can hotspot. I don't need to upgrade my phone.
Yeah,
Now
okay.
when you go and search 5G router, it come out with 5 GHz router.
I think
there's no such thing.
they have three networks, I think. Because later on I will show, I hope I can run that video because that one was under channel new issue. Okay, let's look at this one. Now, from now on,
preferential treatment by the Chinese government.
the things are actually quite dry and so on, but you have to really listen to me.
Untrue. Huawei is a political, economic hostage in a game between the United States and China. I mean, if you start looking at the culture that was quoted before, as you said, Apple, IBM, GE Medical, all of these companies were fake or doing exactly the same thing. 3M, whose its teams against each other in the boardroom to try to figure out who was going to be in charge of what project and what was done.
Thank you. Well, let's move on to Ren's daughter now, Meng Wanzhou. She's Huawei's chief financial officer, and she was arrested on December the 1st in Canada and is awaiting extradition to the United States. Let's go to Lynette now. Lynette, you're in Canada. You're following the story for us. What do you make of the arrest? Was it political, or was it a matter of law enforcement, as they say?
I think it's really quite complicated. From Canada's perspective, because Canada has an extradition treaty with the United States. So when the United States made a request for us to arrest Meng Wanzhou, Canada simply has to oblige. But after the arrest, President Trump also said that Meng's arrest could potentially be used as a bargaining chip in the trade war between States and Canada, which prima facie makes it politically motivated, which casts doubt on the legal basis of the case.
But the legal case against her is that, the allegation anyway, is that she misrepresented her business's dealings with Iran and said that they were compliant with US sanctions.
But there are also arguments against it, saying that Huawei is not the first company that has gone against trade sanctions against Iran, and no one has been arrested before. In previous cases, companies have been slapped fines. So why make the arrest now? This is intrinsically political. I think there are arguments to be made on both sides.
Well, of course, China's government has warned Canada of, quote, grave consequences and called the arrest unreasonable, unconscionable, and vile in nature. Come back to you for a moment, Lynette. Isn't Canada afraid of these grave consequences? We've already had 2 arrests of Canadians in China. We can't say they are linked, but surely Canada is afraid of what its second biggest trading partner might do to it.
So let's put it this way. I think by making those statements, China has actually lost a lot of soft power. And true, China is a very powerful country. It's a very large country in terms of trade, economic power, and military power. But in this very, very globalized world, I think we can all appreciate how important soft power is, because hard power can only get you that far.
Let's go back to Elliot for a second. Elliot, what's your take on the arrest of Meng?
So we know that there are legal components involved, right? We know that there's evidence there. However, what Trump did say is that he would be willing to use Meng as a trade chip if it helps the country and if it helps trade negotiations. Now, you can look at this and say this is just Trump putting his foot in his mouth the way that Trump does, or you can look at it as a gross violation of rule of law. So it really is a Rorschach test here. You can look at it however you want to see it.
Elliot, that's politics for you. Well, the arrest of Huawei's CFO is just one of Washington's battles with Huawei. Federal prosecutors have also indicted the company for allegedly stealing from an American telecoms company.
Huawei began a concerted effort to steal information about a robot that T-Mobile used to test mobile phones. In an effort to build their own robot, Huawei's engineers allegedly violated confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements with T-Mobile by secretly taking photos of the robot.
Now, this is a very interesting thing. Can you steal information just by taking photograph of the equipment? I go to your house, I take a photograph of your microwave induction cooker, and I go back, I can make the induction cooker. We can make a toy.
Learn the idea, the robot press, you don't need a human there.
So, you know, sometimes
You can remember this sort of thing, you don't need to take photo.
Measuring it, and even stealing a piece of it.
Well,
This guy is an
Beijing thinks
FBI
it's all a
guy.
bit of a storm in a teacup. I know the case was originally a civil one, and Huawei had to pay a small fine of around, what, $4.5 million to settle that. Were they bang to rights?
Well, if this is the most that the U.S. has, it definitely is a storm in a teacup. This is not the kind of thing where you're going to say, this is evidence, red hot evidence that they have been engaged in nefarious activities. Tapping the robot was just that. He tapped the telephone screen, and Huawei were acting like Keystone.
Right, thank you. Let's go back to Elliot. Elliot, you are aware of some of these emails that the DOJ, the Department of Justice, has dredged up. What do they say?
Yeah, so in the traffic case, in the indictment for it, the Department of Justice had internal Huawei emails that discussed a system internally where they would incentivize employees within Huawei China that would report and bring stolen IP, in essence, to the company. What the bigger issue is when it comes to Huawei and a lot of these Chinese companies, it's not about these specific instances, it's about systematic IP theft that I think undermines the global trade system.
Well, you know, 5G's been mentioned a lot over the course of this show, but what exactly is it? And why are a number of countries preventing Huawei from being involved? Well, for the United States, it kind of resembles the old space race with the USSR.
It's 1960-something and the space race is on. It's Russia versus the USA. The benefits of winning are inestimable. As the old saying goes, to the victor, the spoils.
It's true. Winning the space race yielded massive tech benefits for years to come, from laptops to satellite TVs and smoke detectors. And whilst not as glamorous, the 5G race is just as crucial. The revolutionary mobile technology of the future is going to be faster, a lot faster, up to 20 gigabits per second. That means you can download an episode of everyone's favourite show, 26 Minutes of Perfection, in just 0.8 seconds. Currently with 4G, it would take you 1.5 minutes. And if you're still on 3G, you have to wait 6.5 hours. But it's not just about speed, it's also about response rates. And that is crucial for some of the futuristic ideas out there. Take driverless cars. Using 5G technology, they're going to react 200 times faster than you or me. Yet faster than a Formula One racing driver by far. And that could prevent those dreadful pile-ups. It'll also help doctors conducting remote surgeries and improve and enhance real-time online gaming. So it seems the benefits are unlimited. But, yes, there's always a but, there's also a dark side. Right now we live in a 4G world where America's Qualcomm is in the lead. But what if things change? China's Huawei dominates. Giant companies in the 5G race could soon know everything about us. What we do, where we go, who we meet. US officials are afraid that Huawei will spy for the Chinese government, help to steal intellectual property from companies, and even pass on state secrets. But surely we'll be protected by the regulators. Well, that won't be possible if the big companies come to dominate the regulatory body itself. At this stage, the race is still on. No one can predict for sure who's going to win the competition. But we do know one thing. Whoever controls 5G will take a controlling stake in our future. So to recap, Huawei is banned from participating in the 5G networks in the following countries: Australia, Japan, New Zealand, the US, and in the UK there's no official ban yet, but British Telecom is keeping Huawei out of its 5G network. Let's go back to Elliot for a second. Elliot, why so much fear and mistrust?
Well, there are a number of different reasons. One that is cited by many countries is this national intelligence law in China, which says that all individuals and companies must comply with requests from law enforcement and intelligence authorities, which means that if the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party asks Huawei for information, they have to
What is
give
the
it.
worst case scenario, the doomsday scenario, Elliot?
Well, it all depends on how much everything's going to be connected in the future with 5G, which is, foreseeably everything. So you can shut down the entire communications grid of a country. Just as with nuclear weapons, a nuclear bomb is not necessarily realistic, but it does give, for example, North Korea or Iran or whatever country that has them, more power, more influence.
That's a very good point. Let's pick that up with Ina now. And it does give them leverage in conversations about trade, perhaps about getting their citizens back if they're arrested abroad.
Well, quite frankly, you could say the same thing about Qualcomm. They have the same power as 4G. I cited the example before where hard drive is sold by American companies all over the world.
Well, there's been no blanket ban in Europe yet, but leaders, including Chancellor Angela Merkel, do have a few questions.
German consumers need to be certain that the Chinese state isn't getting access to data on Chinese products that are sold in Germany.
Well, perhaps she sees how the Chinese government uses data on its own citizens and thinks, that's not for us. The Chinese are being watched closely, with some 170 million CCTV cameras across the country, roughly one camera for every 8 people. And soon, the ratio will be more like one camera for every 2 people, cementing it as one of the most surveilled countries in the world. To put that in perspective, it's way ahead of even Britain, where there's one camera for every 11 people. And the Chinese government is taking things even further, developing Sharp Eyes, a national scheme connecting government and private sector surveillance systems. It will integrate facial recognition, video analytics, and artificial intelligence to identify anyone who might be a threat to the social order, from thieves to jailbreakers. The name of the project echoes a Mao-era communist slogan, "The people have sharp eyes." All this new data could be used to feed the country's controversial social credit system, a point system where citizens will be ranked on their trustworthiness. Good behaviour, for example donating to charity, could lead to perks like faster internet services and visas for Europe. Bad behaviour, reckless driving, smoking where you shouldn't be, could get you banned from flying. Cameras on every corner, the latest artificial intelligence technology, and huge stores of personal data. In China, Big Brother is working overtime. Back to Elliot, lived in China around 9 years or so. Did you feel watched there?
Well, it depends on what we mean by watched. I think that there are security cameras everywhere, and you have to be concerned about being watched. But it was not something that impacted my life to a large degree. However, it never impacts your life until it does. And then once someone who's in power decides that you're somebody who should be watched, then you're in trouble. And I think that the bigger issue here is about transparency and rule of law. So it's that China doesn't have a system where people can be assured, okay, well, these are my rights. This is what can protect my data, can protect my information. So it makes this system seem scarier than it could potentially be, because there are a lot of potential positive upsides to this kind of system.
Sure, but what about the interception of text messages? Tell us about that.
Yeah, this happens quite a bit. So if there's a sensitive term that you're sending a message to somebody on WeChat, or a sensitive image that is kind of causing what they would consider to be disruption, they'll block it. So I'll send a message to a friend or an image to a friend that I think is perfectly fine, but apparently they've decided it's not okay, and my friend will not get it. That happens quite often.
Let's go back to Lynette. Lynette, there is a concern, as Angela Merkel just explained, that consumers are worried that through the Chinese devices, the Chinese government has access to their data?
Well, I think for consumers not living in China, in the foreign country, I think the onus is actually up to the national government of their country to protect the data privacy of the citizens, which is why in this country we are going through a major debate right now whether we should adopt 5G technology. So I think I think this is the responsibility of the national government as well.
Elliot, you know, if Edward Snowden, WikiLeaks tells us anything, it's that the United States already uses American companies and other allies' companies to monitor us and to collect our data without us even knowing. What's the difference?
I think that you make a very good point there. I think that in some ways there's not that much difference. That people should be concerned about what the U.S. government might do to them. I think that the two issues that I always go back on are, one is legal rights and two is transparency. So the fact that we can know what the laws are in a place like the U.S., the fact that, at least if I'm an American citizen, I have rights, I think that that's a very important, differentiation. So that's why I think, if you talk about the differences between the U.S. and the Chinese systems, or the West and Chinese systems, I think in these systems, when you look at, the global scale, these really do matter. And there's something that I think, when you look at China, you say, hey, they're not allies, they're not military or diplomatic allies, this does make a difference. And these issues like transparency and rule of law matter.
Elliot, thank you. Well, as we've heard, the 5G race between the Americans and the Chinese has been compared to the space race between the Americans and the Russians. And judging by Huawei's ads, they get it.
No handphone, right?
Well, a little bit cheeky, but quite amusing. That's all we have time for this week. Thank you to all our guests, Elliot, Lynette and Ina. Thank you as well. And thank you for watching. Remember, you can see this and all our previous episodes on our YouTube channel. Till next week, goodbye.
No, actually, inside there, they are all picking up all this, about the surveillance camera and so on, watching their own citizen and so on. They don't. If I will show you how the Five Eyes organization actually spying on all the internet communication. The US is doing the same thing.
Unless they have an upgradation from the service provider, otherwise it's difficult to spy on.
Okay. This one actually, I think it's quite a lengthy one. I think about 18 minutes. This is actually this. If you really pay attention and actually able to follow through, I think he actually give the interviewer very solid kind of explanations and then knowledge about the risk of the so-called 5G backdoor and so on, and how they can actually prevent it. Because in the internet world, it's actually no so-called that 100% foolproof that nobody can hack. Yeah, definitely they will be hacking. And if you're talking about, to my knowledge also, and then some of the video actually have shown, it will be the most stupid act. If you're going to act hardware to siphon or to channel out information, you can do it through the software rather than the hardware, And that is what, if you will actually listen to Xian Long's closing speech in the Shangri-La's the dialogue forum, he actually mentioned that. He's saying that it's not so much on the Huawei's equipment and so on. Of course, he did not say Huawei. But it is actually, every now and then they have the, the Huawei people will come in to help the local Telco to upgrade the software and then to read news and so on. And then when you do that kind of thing, how do Singapore know what has been done? Even if you go to actually screen through all the hardware, all the server that they're going to be installed, but the subsequent, how go to actually guarantee that? You see? So it's a matter of actually, of course, you have to take measure, and then you have to really make sure that such a thing will not happen, or you at least you can actually minimize it. Before something, let's say, if somebody going to hack it and then want to gain control of the Changi Airport, or even your power stations, or even your Median Crop, before they take over or before they can actually take action, you are already able to screen it and then put a stop to this. That is basically the thing. And that is also what the UK government is actually saying that they think that they are manageable. That is what they say. Manageable. It's a dynamic kind of thing, You cannot say that, when they come in, install, just like buying a car and then it's safe and put the job on it, certified by LTA, then you are safe to drive. Something like that. But this kind of thing is actually a continuous process. Yeah. Okay, so maybe we watch part of it. This one, I think one actually the same one, but with the Chinese subtitle. Okay, this is one.
Our revenues at present, the prohibitions in the National Defense Authorization Act, I think, kick in August of 2019.
And this week on the Communicators, we want to introduce you to Andy Purdy. He is the Chief Security Officer at Huawei Technologies USA. Mr. Purdy, what does that role entail?
Well, primarily it's an internal role. I chair a U.S.-wide committee for cybersecurity and privacy that is similar to the one that we have globally, where you have representatives of each business group, IT, human relations, services, etc., that meets quarterly to manage the requirements for cybersecurity and privacy, to make sure that we are meeting statutory, regulatory, customer requirements and our own internal policies so that we can manage risk from a cybersecurity and privacy perspective. I also work with my government relations and public relations people to talk with customers, talk with stakeholders about issues and try to drive the conversation forward.
Give us a snapshot, if you would, of Huawei.
Well, Huawei is a company with over 180,000 people around the world. About 30% of our products come from Huawei. About 32% of the components of our products come from the United States, about $11 billion a year. We are an employee-owned company. We have, I think, about 80,000 people involved in R&D. We spent $15 billion in R&D last year, which is one of the most important factors, and one of the advantages of being private. We don't have to worry about the quarterly numbers. We can invest in the long term, and that's what we're doing. Our people are motivated essentially by two things. We want to be involved in something that is very interesting and very important, and we want to provide well for our families, and I think we're doing both of those.
Who's the founder?
Mr. Ren.
And what's his background?
Well, he was an engineer, and I'm not an expert in it. He was a civil engineer with the People's Liberation Army many, many years ago, and he moved to form his own company with 4 or 5 others with a few $1,000s. And he's had a spectacular growth, not unprecedented in terms of other companies from the late 80s, such as Cisco, that have had dramatic growth also. But he has always incentivized people to produce, to innovate, and to be customer-centric. That's the primary focus of Huawei, is to be customer-centric, to understand their needs and their potentials, and to help meet those. And it's not to get every dollar of profit out of every particular contract. It's to take a long view, that if our customers make money and their customers make money, we're all working well together for a common advantage.
Do any of us in this room right now have a Huawei product in our hand or in our phones or anything?
Well, I have a Huawei phone. I left it in the other room. But no, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Why is Huawei considered a threat to national security here in the U.S.?
Well, it's a complicated issue. There's not a simple answer to it. There is a geopolitical overlay of the issues related to Huawei. So the U.S. is not safe in cyberspace. And so the U.S. looks at things from a risk perspective, whether it's national security or other risks.
Let's bring Drew Fitzgerald of the Wall Street Journal into this conversation. He covers telecom and technology.
Thanks for having me. Andy, I'm curious. There have been rules proposed and rules enacted in the U.S. that have essentially all but banned Huawei equipment from being involved in most telecom networks, wireless and wireline networks in the U.S. So what's the status of Huawei's business operations in America now?
Well, we have about 1,500 employees in the United States. We have a very strong R&D presence. And as I mentioned, we purchased about $11 billion in U.S. components last year. Our business groups, our carrier business, our enterprise, and our consumer business, we are maintaining our revenues at present. The prohibitions in the National Defense Authorization Act, I think, kick in August of 2019, and those are focused on government contracts, which we do not and are not pursuing, and government contractors. And so there may be a greater potential impact going forward. We believe that in the end, the United States is going to have the kinds of measures in cyberspace that are going to make us a whole lot more secure. When we get to that point, we think we're going to be allowed to compete on a level playing field. But in the meantime, our biggest concern is probably our Tier 3 wireless customers that serve rural America. We believe that our technologies and the services we provide them are essential to farmers and schools and citizens and companies in the rural parts of the United States. So we hope we can maintain that service to serve those people.
And you continue doing business with those smaller rural providers in the United States?
Yes, we have about 40 of those customers, yes.
Around the world, there's been a lot of focus on flaws that have been found in code or vulnerabilities in certain Huawei equipment in places like Italy and places like the UK. Is it possible to secure Huawei devices and networks that run off of them, or is that a pipe dream?
Well, it's impossible to eliminate all risk, whether it's 5G or enterprises or whatever. It's impossible to eliminate all vulnerabilities in products. One of the advantages we have, and I do see it as an advantage, is that we are probably one of the most examined and evaluated companies in the world. So the flaws that we have, such as the UK Oversight Board revealed in terms of our software engineering processes, those are the kinds of things that we can improve as part of a continuous improvement process. And that's the kind of thing that we think to make America safer, to make cyberspace safer. Those kinds of risk mitigation measures, looking for those kinds of vulnerabilities, protecting the threats that exist out there.
How does that work? How do these boards examine millions of lines of code, very complex equipment, some of which involves intellectual property that belongs to Huawei?
Well, there are different kinds of programs in different parts of the world. So we have the UK program where we make our source code available for review under oversight by the government and in close collaboration with the carriers, including evaluating the updates. We have programs in Canada that the Canadian government doesn't really want to emphasize very much. You see a situation where a private company is addressing risk in Mexico, where we supply major equipment to AT&T down there, and they're not being pressured to remove our equipment because AT&T is one of the best companies in the world about risk mitigation. We're setting up a program in Bonn, Germany, working closely with the country of Germany and with our security service, BSI, to come up with measures and mechanisms that make sense for understanding risk, addressing risk, testing the products against international standards, but they want to put in a program that's going to address the risk from all vendors. We have another model in Brussels. I recently was part of an opening of a transparency center in Brussels in early March. We let companies, customers, and governments come in, or bring their third-party experts. They can come in and evaluate our code. And we think that kind of external evaluation is a real plus, and we'd like to see other of our competitors get the benefits of that as well.
Andy Purdy, what's your take on the UK Defense Minister being fired related to a Huawei issue?
I don't know about the details of that. My understanding is that there was an allegation that he had leaked information about preliminary discussions within the UK government, which apparently he describes. What I see that as part of a larger picture. I was over in Warsaw a couple months ago when Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Pompeo, two great Americans, were about to come over, and I was there when they were there. It's amazing the pushback by our closest allies, probably the UK, but Germany, other countries in Europe and other countries around the world that are basically saying, you have not given us, US, you have not given us evidence of cybersecurity wrongdoing by Huawei. And we believe that there are effective risk mitigation measures that can be used. And if we can use those, then we can get the benefits of the technology and perhaps more importantly, the benefits of having competition in this space. We believe competition is essential for the technology, for price, etc. And when you look at, we mentioned before that the U.S. is not safe from a cybersecurity perspective. So what does the U.S. do? There are special risk mitigation programs in effect for our competitors, Nokia and Ericsson, to allow them to do business in the United States. They have tremendous presence in China, including Nokia has a joint venture with Shanghai Bell, owned by the China government. Somehow there are risk mitigation measures in place that satisfy the U.S. government that Nokia does not present a risk to the United States. We just want to talk with the U.S. government. Let's talk about risk mitigation measures that might work in the U.S. so that we can provide assurance and transparency.
Now, your background, you come from a federal government cyber background, don't you?
Yes, and I was a lawyer for a long time. I was a federal prosecutor. I joined the President Bush team under Richard Clark that drafted the National Strategy to Secure Cyberspace, and then moved on to the Department of Homeland Security back in 2003 when we were setting up the cybersecurity effort. And I later led the U.S. cybersecurity effort for a time from DHS.
So did it take a bit of research on your part to say, yes, I trust Huawei before you joined them?
Well, I don't trust anybody. And frankly, the two-part role that when I was recruited by my global boss, John Suffolk, who'd been the CIO of the UK government, that on the part about reaching out, that we were going to be advocates for a safer cyberspace. I was going to be able to be, and have been able to be, an advocate for a safer America in cyberspace. I'm not a defender of Huawei. I'm basically saying, look, we need the best technology. We need to be able to compete. And it's critically important that we address the risk. And we believe there are risk mitigation measures. I've never been told what to say or what I can't say. We want to talk with the U.S. government. We believe that ways can be found to mitigate risk.
Let's bring Drew Fitzgerald back into this conversation.
I want to go back to the risk mitigation issue that you mentioned earlier, because a complaint or an assertion that some U.S. government had made, whether it's right or wrong, has been that even if you were to review all the code and all the practices of some of your competitors like Nokia and Ericsson, at the end of the day, those are countries that don't always answer to their home governments, but they're domiciled in governments that are friendlier to the U.S. government than China often is as an adversary. What's the company's response to that? There's not much you can do about that, but...
Well, no, actually, there are several things you can do about it. But first of all, let me mention the scale of operations that take place in China by Nokia, Ericsson, and even Cisco. And in the case of Nokia, the active involvement of the China government in the joint venture with Nokia, to the extent that geographic access presents some risk, clearly the U.S. government has found some ways to address that risk. The other thing is, and I saw a comment by the principal deputy of the Director of National Intelligence recently about two issues. One has to do with backdoors, which she said they could test for, and the other has to do with customer data. There are mechanisms to address the risk. The assumption is that because our equipment's in the network, that we have access to all the information. We're not trying to sell into the core for 5G. We just want to sell into the radio access. And the fact is there are strict requirements when we go to service the customer. There's an assumption that the Huawei network is attached to the customer network, and it's not. So for example, we have mechanisms, and it's all subject to explicit permission by the customer every time, specially configured laptops with virtual private network cloud to access the customer network, and the ability for them to record every keystroke that is logged by that laptop that touches the customer network. We're open to what are some additional measures that could be done to make sure that that data is protected. But the assumptions are wrong, and the fact is, the other part is, people talk like it's the equipment providers have the risk. Well, we have our part of the risk. But the carriers, you saw Chairman Pai of the FCC just recently referenced the fact that our network operators, they own the risk. They control the network. They monitor the inbound, outbound, and internal traffic for anomalous activities.
These are your customers. These the network operators.
Yes, they have their responsibilities. The ISO international standards covered, the ITU standards out of the UN covered.